Hi everyone, I'm Nikia Nolan, Livestock Officer for the North Coast Local Land Services. Today I'd like to go through with you a little bit of a herd health check, which you should be doing routinely as you check your cattle and your water and grass each day. So behind me here we have a few steers. It's always good to be familiar with what cattle you're working with each day. That way, when something unusual pops up, you're much quicker to detect it. In this paddock, we have approximately 100 steers. We started off with 127, but when we weighed them the other day, we removed the bottom 25 to 30% so that they weren't getting bullied and they can focus on growing. These steers average about 400 kilos or just over, with the main range being between 360 to 430 kilos. It's always good to be familiar with what production your cattle are doing. That way you're quicker to identify if any are slipping or going backwards. Generally, when I first come into a paddock, I do a quick scan to make sure all the cattle look like they belong in the same mob, they have the same visual ID tag, and also they all have their own NLIS tag. It is important that all your livestock have an NLIS tag, as this is part of the National Livestock Identification System. You should also check that there's no unusual stock which may belong to neighbours or be wandering stock. As a part of a general health check, I'd like to identify a few key things that you should be checking off as you look at your cattle routinely. You should be looking for if there's any flies or ticks or other type of parasite annoying them. This might be shown in head flicking, tail swishing, cattle appearing irritated, or just the visual seeing plenty of flies attacking the cattle. They may also get weepy eyes, have drooly noses, or have a lot of wet manure and bulk piling up at their tails. You should also be checking for other health issues such as noisy breathing, drooling, coughing, general lethargy, so tiredness, weakness, sulking. So even though these cattle have all came up to me in this paddock, it is always important to go for a look further out to see if there's any cattle isolated by themselves, sulking or unable to move. If your animals are bellowing, appearing very alert and reactive, or chasing your pet dogs or working dogs, there may be an issue of pests such as wild dogs or even town dogs coming and irritating your livestock. When you're moving your livestock, whether walking them through a gate or just pushing them along up a laneway, it's also important to take note if any have physical injury, are lame, or maybe lethargic as far as falling behind, slow walkers, or starting to drool as they're walking along. In grazing systems, when you can't tell the cattle exactly what to eat, as they are selective grazers, that means that you need to be aware of nutritional related illness. You should be looking for pot bellies, drooling, non-eaters, so they may be falling away or show a wasting disease, so becoming thinner, just an overall appearance of a general sickness or loss in body condition, or they may become downer cows, meaning that they come down and cannot get up. Nutritional risks related to some of the characteristics in a grazing system include nutritional deficiencies, which may derive from a deficiency in soil, such as cobalt, common in coastal areas, or selenium, or it may even be related to the pasture species, such as clovers and legumes, which generally are related to issues such as bloat. After periods of drought or rainfall events, where there's a fresh green pick or rapidly growing grass, there can also be other issues such as grass tetany related to a magnesium deficiency, or other issues where the grass is growing rapidly, such as nitrate poisoning. When you go to move your cattle, it's always good to have a herd head count. That way you know exactly how many you've moved and keep record of mortality, sickness, and changes in herd numbers. If your herd number changes, it's always best to go for a drive around and make sure you find where those numbers have gone missing. These may be mortalities, illness, so they may be sulking over in a corner which need treatment or moving into a hospital pen, or they may be stock that have gone missing where you need to go find them. Stools can say a lot about cattle health. Looking at this pasture, it's good quality, but from where we are at in the season, it's all starting to get more fibrous, go to seed head and be reproductive. Therefore, you should be expecting the stools to get a bit more structure about themselves, just like this, as there's a lot more fibre in the diet than if they were grazing this grass when it was still mostly vegetative and soft. Let's go take a look around and see what other stools we can find. This stool here is starting to get a little less structure and a bit more watery. The cow that produced this may be choosing to pick around and get a lot more leafy matter rather than the reproductive seed head. This stool here is a bit more runny than the last two that we've looked at. The colour of it is dark green, which is expected on pasture like this, which is high in chloroplasts. If it was any darker or an unusual light colour like white, cream or even bloody, then you will be concerned about the health of your animals and you should look further into what's causing the scours. If this stool was runnier or had bubbles, that's a good telltale sign of acidosis, which may have been caused from a diet change or something upsetting the rumen, such as being off feed and having quick feed, or having too good a quality of feed and not enough fibre. If there's other signs of poorly digested material in your stools, such as grain heads, then you should also be looking into the digestibility and fibre content of your feed. We'll go for a walk around and just see if there's any cattle that I would want to identify as ones that I'd want to keep a closer eye on than the others over the next few days. This guy here, you can see compared to the others, he's a bit more rougher coat, and I would be a bit worried, but considering the season we're at, we're coming out of winter into summer, he is most likely just losing his winter coat. He still has good body condition, his neck's shiny where most of the roughness has came from, and his bum is clean. If he was sunken in, had a dirty backside, then I would be considering other parasites or something else causing him to become that bit more of a woody, poorer conditioned, rough coat. We'll go for a look around further. So these guys should all be gaining weight. So you don't want any bullying. And as you can see here, there's a few smaller guys in the mob. There are also fellas that you should be keeping an eye on, making sure they're not getting bullied or isolated from the rest of the cattle. As you move through, you should also be looking for lameness or injury. A lot of them that are at the front of the mob are generally the more confident, bigger, healthier cows. As soon as the cow starts feeling a little bit off or isn't as confident as the others, it will be hiding a bit more behind the mob or off to the side. So it's always good to have a good thorough check through, make sure that they're all okay. This little guy here, he's smaller, got a bit of a rough coat, so he's definitely the type of steer I'd be keeping in mind as I do my routinely checks each day. If you're checking your cattle and they don't stand up, it's always best to make them a bit uneasy and stand them up, just in case, even though you think they're just quiet, they may have a bit of down a cow or have an injury such as lameness where they're just wanting to choose rest over walking about. This one here is slightly lame, so it's best to remove him from the mob and treat him up at the yards. He is a bit smaller than the others, so this could have been a result of bullying where he slipped over. Also, we have had plenty of afternoon storms with rain, so the ground is quite slippery. So he may have just slipped over, or it could be something else such as an object stuck between his toes or an infection within his foot. So we'll pull him out, take him to the yards, check him out, diagnose it, and treat it for what it is. You can see this guy, he's got a few warts on his neck. Warts are generally a sign of stress. We have just came out of some pretty dry conditions, which means that warts can be typical on a lot of cattle. Even though it doesn't look very appealing, they aren't that much of a health issue. Overall, I'm really happy with this mob. We will remove that one that's lame and treat him, but the rest are all pretty happy, chewing their cud, ready to move on to the next paddock. Now that we've covered most of the herd health check looking at weaners, like these steers, let's move over to a cow-calf mob where there's a few more things you should be looking out for. We're just here with a cow and calf herd. They're a bit noisy because we just moved them into this holding yard with some dog. If you get into your paddock where they should be relaxed and they're bellowing like this, it's a good telltale sign that something's really irritated them, such as wild dogs or town dogs. When you're looking at these girls, you can see that they're quite happy. Their ears are up. There's no drooling. There's no tonguing. They're not hollowed out or woody looking. Their bums are pretty clean. And there's no big telltale signs of fly worry, ticks, or any type of pneumonia or some type of disease. When you're running bulls, it's really important to not have them too thin or too fat. These two boys here are a pretty good example of how they should be looking, because if they get too fat or too thin, they start losing libido. That means they stop working and chasing your girls, trying to get them pregnant again for next year. I've just taken notice of this bull. As you can see, his penis is a bit droopy looking and it's a bit pink. But after I followed him around for a bit, he sucked it back up. Therefore, he must be just active chasing his girls. If he wasn't sucking this back up and it kept dragging around or appeared a bit swollen or a bit more pink or discoloured, then you would be worried he's had some type of injury. For that, I would recommend getting a vet out. When you're looking at bulls, it's really important to take note of their conformation. They should have good sound feet, healthy eyes, not be too fat or too thin. They should have a good large scrotum, that way they're healthy to be reproducing. It's always good for bulls to get a semen test. Get your local vet out, do a test, and that way you know if they're able to be fertile and reproduce for your girls. Finally, with bulls, it's always good to keep an eye on them, make sure they're all following their girls around and they're still happy in their herd. If you have a few bulls that are continuously fighting with each other, obviously they're focusing on each other more than the girls, and they may not be able to be serving your girls efficiently. Also, after bullying between the bulls, sometimes one may get a bit sulky and hang away from the girls. It's always best to keep an eye when you're mixing bulls in one herd so that they're all working, and if not, switch them out and make sure they all have friends. When looking at your cows and calves, it's always good to take note of their udders and who's feeding who. This girl here owns this little heifer and her udder is beautiful. It's nice and perky, full of milk, and teats don't show any signs of discomfort. And also, it's good to take note if any cows are dry. That means their udders will be shriveled up, not full of milk, and there will not be a calf sucking her. When checking cows and calves in the paddock, it's always best to have a look if any cows are bellowing or searching around looking for a calf. This calf may be lost, sick, or in worst case scenario, dead. When you're in the paddock searching for calves or moving cows, it's always good to be aware of long grass or the fact that calves are really good at laying down and hiding from people. So be very careful when you're travelling around in a paddock in case you come across a calf. When you're moving cows and calves to a new paddock, it's always good to take note of distance. Sometimes it's best if you just open a gate and let them make their own way through to the next pen rather than moving the cattle through several paddocks where there is a higher chance of leaving a calf behind or a calf getting overly tired. Checking cows and calves each day, it's always good to take note of who's cycling and who's springing. So if your calves are about to come on the ground, when they spring, cattle start to get really soft around the backside and the udders start to get nice and perky as they produce milk. You'll also sometimes see a string of goo coming from their back end. When cattle are cycling, it's always good to take note of who the bulls are chasing as well. When checking cows and calves each day, it's also good to take note of if any calves appear woody or thin. Another calf may be stealing milk, or the cow may not be producing enough milk for the calf, or the cow not being a good mother and not letting the calf drink. You should also take note if the calf has scours, that is, discoloured poo or runny poo, and it will cause the calf to get very sick. Also, if a cow's udder is really bulging and full and she seems uncomfortable, she may have lost her calf. So it's always best to have a look around to see if any cows have bulging udders as well as dry udders or bellowing around searching for a calf.